The young chief petty officer adjusted the gig line on his brand-new khaki uniform for the 10th time. It was perfect. It had to be. He caught the eye of an old man sitting alone in the back row, a faded Navy retired cap pulled low. "Sir, with all due respect," the young chief said, his voice loud enough for others to hear, "that cover is unauthorized in here, and your grandson's ribbon rack is a disgrace." The old man didn't answer. He just slowly, deliberately reached up and removed the cap, placing it in his lap. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from a memory sparked by the boy's unearned arrogance. He had heard those words before, in a place much hotter and louder than this quiet auditorium. If you believe true respect is earned, not given, and that heroes walk among us unseen, type honor in the comments below. Master Chief Petty Officer Elias Thorne, retired, felt the familiar ache in his knuckles as he folded his hands over the worn brass eagle head of his cane. The tremor was worse today. It always was when he was back on a base, the air thick with the scent of salt, diesel, and freshly starched uniforms. He was 82 years old, a fact his body reminded him of with every step from the parking lot. He wore simple gray slacks, a crisp but well-worn blue button-down shirt, and comfortable shoes. He was a ghost here, a relic from a different Navy, a different world. His skin was a road map of his years, thin as parchment over the prominent veins in his hands, dotted with age spots that he privately called his service medals from the sun. The only thing about him that hinted at a past of command was his eyes. They were a pale, washed-out blue, but they didn't wander. They observed. They assessed. They saw the nervous energy of the young sailors setting up chairs, the false bravado of the chief selects in their stiff new uniforms, the subtle hierarchy of the room playing out in posture and tone. He had a specific way of sitting, spine straight, shoulders squared, a posture drilled into him over 50 years that even the slump of age could not entirely erase. In the left pocket of his slacks, his thumb and forefinger found the milled edges of a heavy brass coin, a comforting, familiar weight. He'd carried it for 60 years, a silent testament to a night of fire and water that no one in this room could possibly imagine. He wasn't here for the main event, the pinning ceremony for the new chiefs. He was here for the preliminary awards for his grandson, Seaman Apprentice Michael Thorne. Michael was a good kid, still finding his sea legs, and was receiving a simple letter of commendation for volunteer work. It wasn't the Navy Cross, but to Elias, it was just as important. It was a start. It was a step on the path. He found a seat in the very back row, wanting to be present but invisible, a silent witness to his grandson's small moment of pride. The low hum of the fluorescent lights overhead, the squeak of rubber-soled shoes on linoleum, the distant clang of metal on metal from the pier. It was a symphony he knew by heart, but what none of them knew, not the officers, not the bystanders, not even his own grandson, was that in the glove box of his old Ford pickup sat a small velvet-lined box containing a medal so rare most of them had only ever seen it in books. The multi-purpose room on Naval Station Norfolk was aggressively neutral, beige walls, speckled linoleum floors polished to a blinding sheen, and rows of interlocking plastic chairs that sighed under any amount of weight. A large American flag was perfectly positioned on the stage to the right of the podium, its colors a vibrant slash against the otherwise muted palette. To the left stood the state flag of Virginia. Young sailors, mostly E3s and below, bustled about, arranging programs, testing the microphone with mumbled counts to 10, and trying to look busy whenever a khaki-clad figure walked past. The air was thick with a unique tension, a blend of formal ceremony and raw, nervous energy. Today was a rite of passage. In a few hours, a handful of first-class petty officers would have anchors pinned to their collars. They would cross a line, becoming not just leaders, but the chief. It was a transformation, a sacred moment in the naval tradition, and the weight of it pressed down on the room. Elias watched them, the selectees, standing in a tight, self-conscious group near the front. They were sharp, their uniforms so new the creases could cut paper. Their faces were a mixture of pride and sheer terror. He remembered the feeling. He remembered the weight of that first anchor, the sudden, crushing responsibility that came with it. It felt like a lifetime ago. A young petty officer, Simmons, was meticulously straightening the already perfect chairs in the front row. His movements precise and anxious. He was clearly on the staff of one of the selectees, and his own stress mirrored his boss's. He glanced back at Elias, a flicker of curiosity in his eyes at the old man sitting so still and alone, then dismissed him, turning his attention back to the more important matters at the front of the room. The world was divided into two groups today, those who were a part of the ceremony and those who were not. Elias was firmly, and by his own choice, in the latter. He was just a civilian, a grandfather, a spectator. No one here knew his story, and that was just how he liked it. 300 miles away, in a quiet office at the Pentagon, a man with 4 silver stars on his collar adjusted a framed photograph on his desk. It was an old black and white picture of a young, intense-looking Master Chief, his eyes hard, but his mouth hinting at a smile. The man in the office owed his entire career to the man in that photograph. He just didn't know he was about to get a call about him. The conflict began, as it so often does, with a small matter of perceived order. Chief Petty Officer Select Marcus Cole was on edge. At 31, he was young for a chief, a fact he was immensely proud of and deeply insecure about. He had out-hustled, out-studied, and outmaneuvered his peers to get here, and he felt the burning need to prove he belonged. His entire being was focused on projecting an aura of absolute competence and authority. His uniform was a suit of armor, his knowledge of regulations a weapon. When he saw Elias Thorne sitting in the back, he didn't see a veteran or a grandfather. He saw a deviation from the norm, a loose thread in the perfect tapestry of his day. He strode down the center aisle, his polished shoes clicking with crisp, authoritarian rhythm. He stopped directly in front of Elias, forcing the old man to crane his neck to look up at him. "Sir," Cole began, his voice polite but firm, the kind of tone used for correcting subordinates, not addressing elders. "Good morning. We're trying to maintain a professional atmosphere for the ceremony. Naval regulations prohibit wearing covers indoors." Elias simply looked at him, his pale blue eyes unblinking. He didn't offer an excuse or an argument. He slowly reached up with a trembling hand, removed the Navy retired cap, and placed it on his lap. The movement was deliberate, without any hint of subservience. It was simple compliance, nothing more. Cole waited for a verbal response, an "excuse me, Chief," or an "I apologize." When none came, a flicker of irritation crossed his face. His authority had been obeyed but not acknowledged. He felt the need to press the issue, to establish the dynamic clearly. "Thank you for your cooperation," he added, his tone a little sharper. Elias merely gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. His gaze drifted past Cole toward the stage, as if the young chief had already ceased to exist. For Cole, this was an even greater offense than the hat. He was being dismissed. The young chief-select felt a hot flush of anger creep up his neck. He was about to become a chief petty officer in the United States Navy. He was a leader of sailors. He would not be dismissed by some geriatric civilian, retired or not. He scanned Elias, his eyes hungry for another infraction, another point of leverage. He found it in the figure of Michael Thorne, who had just walked in and was standing near his grandfather. Michael's uniform was neat enough for a seaman apprentice, but Cole's hypercritical eye immediately found fault. "You," Cole barked, shifting his attention to the young man, who flinched as if struck. "Your ribbon rack. It's a quarter-inch too low, and the alignment is off. Are you representing this command looking like that?" Michael's face went crimson. He stammered, I'm sorry, Chief. I measured it this morning." "Measure it again," Cole snapped. "Details matter, sailor. Perception is reality. How you present yourself is a reflection of your respect for the uniform, for this ceremony, for the Navy. Do you understand me?" "Yes, Chief," Michael mumbled, his eyes fixed on the floor. It was then that Elias spoke for the first time. His voice was quiet, raspy with age, yet it cut through the air with surprising clarity. "Leave the boy alone." Cole pivoted back to Elias, his eyebrows raised in disbelief. "Excuse me?" "You made your point," Elias said, his voice still low, but now with a core of steel beneath the frail surface. "He's a good sailor. He's nervous. Let him be." Cole puffed out his chest. This was a direct challenge to his newfound authority, and in front of other sailors. He couldn't let it stand. "With all due respect, old-timer," Cole said, leaning in slightly, his voice dripping with condescension, "you've been out of the game for a long time. The standards in my Navy are higher now. We demand perfection, something a civilian wouldn't understand." The phrase, "my Navy," hung in the air, a declaration of ownership. Elias's jaw tightened. The tremor in his hands stilled. He looked up at Cole, his pale eyes seeming to strip away the uniform, the rank, the arrogance, and see the insecure boy beneath. "Your Navy?" Elias repeated softly. "Son, you're a guest in a house you didn't build." The chief-select thought this was the end of the conversation. He was wrong. This was the beginning of the worst day of his career. Elias Thorne closed his eyes for a moment, a wave of weariness washing over him. It wasn't the physical fatigue of an old man, but a deeper, soul-level exhaustion. He had seen boys like Cole before. They were everywhere, in every generation, full of fire and certainty, convinced they were the first to truly understand the world, the first to demand excellence. They mistook arrogance for confidence and regulations for wisdom. He remembered a young ensign on the deck of the USS Forrestal, moments before the fire, barking at a sailor about an unbuttoned pocket. The ensign was gone an hour later, and the sailor with the unbuttoned pocket had pulled 3 men from the flames. What mattered, what truly endured, was not the crispness of a crease in a uniform, but the strength of the character within it. He opened his eyes and looked at his grandson. Michael was trying to subtly adjust his ribbons, his face a mask of shame and frustration. Elias felt a pang of anger, not for himself, but for the boy. This was supposed to be a proud day for Michael, a small but significant milestone, and this peacocking chief-select had tarnished it, turning it into a moment of public humiliation. Elias felt the challenge coin in his pocket. He thought about pulling it out. It was a plank owner coin from a submarine that had been decommissioned 30 years ago. On one side was the ship's crest. On the other, an inscription, "The Standard is the Standard." It had been a gift from his own first command Master Chief, a legend named McAllister, who chewed iron and spat rust. McAllister had taught him that the standard wasn't about the angle of a cover or the placement of a ribbon. The standard was courage. The standard was integrity. The standard was looking out for your people, especially when they were young and scared. Cole was all about the rules, but he didn't understand the standard. Not yet. Elias decided to let it go. Arguing with the boy would only escalate the situation and embarrass Michael further. He would endure the disrespect. He had endured far worse. He gave his grandson a small, reassuring nod, a silent message. "This doesn't matter. I'm proud of you." Michael seemed to understand, and a little of the tension left his shoulders. Elias settled back into his chair, a statue of quiet dignity retreating into the fortress of his own memories. The trigger was not a shout, but a whisper. As Cole turned away, satisfied that he had established his dominance, the base commanding officer, Captain Miller, entered the room for a final walkthrough. He was a stern but fair man in his late 40s, flanked by his executive officer and his command master chief, a man named Hernandez. They exchanged pleasantries with the chief selects, their presence immediately elevating the tension in the room to a new level. Cole stood even straighter, a practiced professional smile plastered on his face. He wanted to make a good impression. Captain Miller's gaze swept the room and noticed the small commotion in the back. "Everything all right over there, Master Chief?" he asked Hernandez, nodding toward Cole and the Thorns. Command Master Chief Hernandez, a man with a face like a catcher's mitt and an encyclopedic knowledge of everyone on his base, started walking toward the back. Cole intercepted him. "No problem, Master Chief," Cole said quickly. "Just ensuring our standards of dress and appearance are being met before the ceremony. A minor uniform correction for the seamen and a civilian guest who needed a reminder about indoor cover policy." Hernandez's eyes fell on Elias, who was now just a quiet old man sitting with his hat in his lap. He then looked at the humiliated seaman. "The guest is Seaman Thorne's grandfather," Hernandez said, his voice low and neutral. "He's here for his grandson's award." "Understood, Master Chief," Cole said, puffing up. "I believe that even guests should show respect for our customs and courtesies." Hernandez's expression didn't change, but his eyes narrowed slightly. He looked back at Elias, a flicker of something, not quite recognition, but professional curiosity in his gaze. He addressed Elias directly, his tone respectful. "Welcome to the base, sir. I'm Master Chief Hernandez. I hope my chief select here wasn't giving you a hard time." Before Elias could respond, Michael, wanting to diffuse the situation, spoke up. "No, Master Chief, it's fine. My grandfather, he's Master Chief Thorne. Retired." He said it quietly, a simple statement of fact. But the name, spoken aloud, landed in the air with unexpected weight. Thorne. Hernandez froze. He looked from the old man's weathered face back to the name on the program for the letter of commendation, Seaman Apprentice Michael Thorne. The pieces clicked into place with an audible snap in his mind. And as he stood there in that plastic chair, waiting for someone to call his name, not a single person in that room knew that the tremor in his hands wasn't from age. It was from the same thing that had earned him the medal locked inside the glove box of his truck. Master Chief Hernandez didn't say another word to Cole or to the Thorns. He gave a curt nod, turned on his heel, and walked briskly back to Captain Miller. He leaned in and spoke in a low, urgent tone that was inaudible to anyone more than a few feet away. Captain Miller's face, initially relaxed, went rigid. His eyes darted to the back of the room, fixing on the unassuming old man in the gray slacks. The captain's expression shifted from surprise to disbelief, and then to a deep, profound alarm. He pulled his executive officer aside, and a new hushed but frantic conversation began. The atmosphere in the room changed instantly. The casual chatter died down. Sailors who had been milling about suddenly found reasons to be still. Everyone could feel it, the invisible seismic shockwave that had just radiated from the command group. They could see the way the captain was looking at the old man. They saw the XO pull out his phone and start typing with furious intensity. Something was happening. Something big. From his vantage point, Chief Select Cole saw the command triad's sudden change in demeanor. He couldn't hear what was being said, but he saw their glances toward the back of the room. He misinterpreted the entire scene. He assumed Hernandez was reporting his diligence, that the captain was impressed by his proactive enforcement of standards. A small, self-satisfied smile touched his lips. He had done the right thing. He had shown initiative. He had acted like a chief. He felt a surge of validation. He was ready. He belonged. Meanwhile, 300 miles away, the phone on Fleet Master Chief David Anderson's desk buzzed. The caller ID read C.O. Navsta Norfolk. Anderson was the senior enlisted leader for the entire Atlantic Fleet, a man whose voice could make admirals pause and listen. He answered with a simple, "Anderson." He listened for no more than 10 seconds. The color drained from his face. He didn't ask questions. He didn't say goodbye. He simply hung up the phone, stood, grabbed the keys to his waiting staff car, and walked out of his office with a look on his face that his aide had never seen before, a mixture of fury and something that looked terrifyingly like reverence. He was walking out the door before his aide could even ask where he was going. Cole, basking in his perceived victory, decided to double down. He saw the command group's urgent conversation as his cue. He believed they were discussing how to handle the disrespectful old man. He walked back toward Elias, his stride even more confident than before. This time, he wouldn't be dismissed. This time he would have the full, albeit unspoken, backing of the captain himself. "Sir," he began again, his voice now carrying a patronizing edge, "I think it would be best if you waited outside until after the ceremony. We can't have any more disruptions." Michael Thorne stepped forward, placing himself partially between Cole and his grandfather. "Chief, he wasn't disrupting anything. He's just sitting here." "Your grandfather challenged my authority, Seaman," Cole said, his voice dropping to a low growl meant only for the three of them. "That is a disruption. Here in this Navy, we have a chain of command. We have order. He needs to understand his place." Elias looked up at Cole, and for the first time a flicker of pity entered his eyes. The boy was so lost, so utterly blind to the reality of the situation that was about to engulf him. Elias didn't say a word. He didn't need to. He simply held the young chief's gaze. In that moment, the power dynamic in their small triangle began to invert. It was no longer the confident chief and the frail old man. It was a man who had seen everything and a boy who had seen nothing. The certainty in Cole's eyes began to waver under the weight of that silent, knowing gaze. He felt a sudden, inexplicable chill, a primal instinct warning him that he had crossed a line he didn't even know was there. Up at the front of the room, Captain Miller was now on his own phone. His voice was strained. "Yes, sir. Right away, sir." "I understand." He hung up and looked at Hernandez, his face pale. "Fleet Master Chief is en route. ETA is 15 minutes. He said, and I quote, 'Do not start that ceremony, and do not let that man leave the building.'" What the young officer didn't realize was that someone was already watching, someone who recognized that face from a photograph that had hung on a wall in the Pentagon for 19 years. The 15 minutes that followed were the longest of Marcus Cole's life. The ceremony was put on an indefinite hold. Captain Miller announced a short delay due to unforeseen administrative issues, a piece of jargon so bland it only heightened the tension. The command triad stood awkwardly near the stage, periodically glancing toward the main entrance, and then back at the old man in the last row. No one knew what was going on, but everyone knew it centered on him. The whispers started, spreading through the rows of sailors like a grass fire. Who was he? Was he a retired admiral? A politician? Why did the captain look like he was about to be sick? Cole remained in the back, trapped in a state of suspended animation. He couldn't retreat without losing face, but he couldn't press his attack with the captain's eyes burning a hole in his back. He stood there, a statue of a misplaced authority, while his perfect day crumbled around him. Elias, for his part, remained perfectly still, his hands resting on his cane. He seemed to be the only calm person in the room. He watched the chaos unfold with a detached, almost sad resignation. He hadn't wanted this. He had come for a quiet moment with his grandson. But the Navy, it seemed, had a long memory. Then the doors at the back of the auditorium swung open. 2 uniformed master-at-arms entered first, their presence instantly silencing the remaining whispers. They stood at parade rest on either side of the entrance. Through the doors strode Fleet Master Chief David Anderson. He was a tall, imposing man whose khaki uniform seemed to be part of his skin. On his sleeve were 4 gold stars, a rank so senior that most sailors only saw it in photographs. The air crackled. Captain Miller and his entire command group snapped to attention. Cole, seeing the rank, reflexively did the same, his heart pounding against his ribs. The room changed when Fleet Master Chief Anderson spoke. His voice wasn't loud, but it filled the space, vibrating with a power that had been earned over 35 years of service. He didn't look at Captain Miller. He didn't look at the Chief Selects. His eyes scanned the room and then locked onto the old man in the back row. A look of profound, unadulterated respect transformed his stern features. He began to walk down the center aisle, his steps deliberate and sure. He walked past the CO, past the XO, past the shell-shocked Marcus Cole. He walked until he was standing directly in front of Elias Thorne. The entire room held its breath. The silence was absolute, broken only by the hum of the lights. Fleet Master Chief Anderson stopped 2 feet from Elias's chair. For a long moment the 2 men just looked at each other, the most powerful enlisted man in the Atlantic Fleet and the unassuming old man with the trembling hands. Anderson's gaze was filled with a complex mixture of emotions, reverence, relief, and a deep, abiding respect that bordered on awe. Elias gave a slow, tired nod, as if greeting an old friend he hadn't expected to see. Then Anderson did something that sent a shock wave through every sailor present. He squared his shoulders, brought his heels together with an audible click, and rendered the sharpest, most precise hand salute of his life. His arm was a straight line, his fingers perfectly aligned, his bearing immaculate. It was not the casual salute one gives a senior officer. It was a gesture of profound deference, a salute reserved for a legend. Master Chief Thorne. Anderson's voice was thick with emotion, but steady as a rock. It is an honor to see you again, sir. The word sir, from a fleet master chief to a retired one, was a cannon shot. It was a violation of every protocol, and yet in that moment it felt like the most natural thing in the world. Elias slowly, with visible effort, pushed himself up from his chair, using his cane for support. He stood, not quite at attention, but as straight as his 82-year-old spine would allow. He raised his trembling right hand and returned the salute, his hand hovering near his temple for a moment, before dropping back to his side. "At ease, David," Elias said, his voice quiet but clear. "Good to see you're still keeping the fleet in line." Anderson dropped his salute, but remained standing at a respectful position of attention. He turned his head slightly, his eyes finding the frozen form of Marcus Cole. The warmth in Anderson's expression vanished, replaced by a glacial cold. He didn't need to ask what had happened. He had seen 1,000 variations of this scene in his career. The arrogance of the newly powerful clashing with the quiet dignity of the truly experienced. He knew, and as he sat there in that plastic chair, waiting for someone to call his name, not a single person in that room knew that the tremor in his hands wasn't from age. It was from the same thing that had earned him the medal locked inside the glove box of his truck. Fleet Master Chief Anderson turned his full attention to Cole. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His quiet, controlled fury was more terrifying than any shout. "Chief Select Cole," he said, the title dripping with ice. Cole's mouth was dry. "Yes, Fleet Master Chief?" "I am told you were maintaining standards," Anderson said, his eyes boring into Cole. "Tell me, what is the first and most important standard for any chief petty officer?" Cole swallowed hard. "Integrity, Fleet Master Chief?" "No," Anderson shot back. "That's the standard for a human being. The first standard for a chief is to know your people. And the first rule of knowing your people is to know your history, because if you don't know where you came from, you will never understand where you are." He gestured with his chin toward Elias. "Do you have any idea who this is?" "He's a retired Master Chief, Fleet Master Chief," Cole stammered, his confidence evaporating like sea spray on hot steel. "That," Anderson said, his voice low and dangerous, "is like saying Mount Everest is a hill. You are standing in the presence of Master Chief Petty Officer Elias Thorne. Does that name mean anything to you, Cole?" Cole's mind raced. Thorne. He'd heard the name. Where? It was on a plaque somewhere. A building name? The leadership award given out every year? The Thorne Award for Deck Plate Leadership. His blood ran cold. He's the namesake for the Thorne Award, Cole whispered, the realization dawning on him with sickening force. "He is more than a namesake," Anderson corrected him. "He is the standard. This man served for 38 years. He was at Yankee Station during Rolling Thunder. He was on the deck of the Forrestal when the flight deck burned. He pulled 6 men, including the man who would become the future CNO, out of a jet fuel fire with his bare hands." Anderson took a step closer to Cole, who flinched. This man was one of the first SEALs, before they were even called SEALs. He spent 18 months in a jungle so deep and dark that God himself couldn't find it, leading reconnaissance missions that saved an entire battalion. When he finally retired as the Master Chief Petty Officer of the 5th Fleet, he had trained, mentored, and shaped literally thousands of chiefs, including me. I was a scared petty officer 3rd class on my first deployment, and this man taught me how to lead. He taught me what a chief is. Anderson paused, letting the weight of his words settle over the stunned room. He looked at Elias, his expression softening again. The medal he doesn't wear, the one he keeps in a box because he believes the real heroes never came home, is the Navy Cross. A collective gasp went through the auditorium. The Navy Cross. Second only to the Medal of Honor. It was a piece of living history. The young sailors stared, their mouths agape. Michael Thorne looked at his grandfather as if seeing him for the first time, his mind struggling to reconcile the quiet, gentle old man who taught him how to fish with the warrior being described. Cole just stood there, his face ashen, his world completely undone. He looked at Elias's trembling hands and finally understood. It wasn't age. It was the lingering ghost of the fire. The full weight of the moment crashed down upon Marcus Cole. Every ounce of his arrogance, his pride, his carefully constructed authority was stripped away, leaving only raw, gut-wrenching shame. He looked at Elias Thorne, at the pale blue eyes that held no malice, no triumph, only a deep, weary sadness. He had not just insulted an old man. He had desecrated a sacred piece of the very institution he so desperately wanted to lead. He had stood on the shoulders of a giant and tried to brush dust off his collar. Fleet Master Chief Anderson wasn't finished. He took another step until he was standing directly in front of Cole, invading his personal space. He looked him up and down, his eyes lingering on Cole's own pristine uniform. "You were concerned about standards, Chief Select," Anderson said, his voice a quiet razor. "Let's talk about yours." He reached out and tapped the top ribbon on Cole's chest, the Navy and Marine Corps Achievement Medal. "This ribbon, the top edge is supposed to be 1/4 inch above the left pocket. Yours is off by at least 1/8 of an inch. A minor detail, I know." He then pointed to Cole's belt buckle. "Your gig line. It's perfect. But you've shined that buckle so much. You've worn the plating thin on the corners. You've been focused on the reflection, not the foundation." Cole's face burned with humiliation. He felt hundreds of pairs of eyes on him, dissecting him, judging him. "You were so busy inspecting everyone else," Anderson concluded, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "You forgot to inspect yourself. Leadership, Chief, is not about finding fault in others. It's about inspiring them to find the best in themselves. You don't build people up by tearing them down. Master Chief Thorne taught me that. It's a lesson you have yet to learn." Anderson stepped back, his point made. He turned to Captain Miller. "Captain, I believe we've had a sufficient delay. Let's proceed with the awards. Starting with Seaman Apprentice Thorne." Captain Miller, looking immensely relieved to have an order to follow, nodded vigorously. "Yes, Fleet Master Chief." He motioned for Michael to come forward. Michael, dazed, walked toward the stage on unsteady legs. As he passed his grandfather, Elias reached out and put a hand on his arm. "You're all right, son," he whispered. "Stand tall." The immediate aftermath was a study in contrasts. As Michael Thorne walked to the stage, the entire room, from the captain to the lowest-ranking seaman, rose to their feet. The applause was thunderous, a spontaneous outpouring of respect, not just for the young sailor, but for the legacy he represented. It was the loudest applause a simple letter of commendation had ever received. Michael accepted his award, his face a mixture of pride and bewilderment, and shook the captain's hand. As he walked back, he didn't return to his seat. He walked to his grandfather and stood beside him. Marcus Cole remained frozen in the aisle, a pariah in his own ceremony. The other chief selects subtly shifted away from him. His perfect day was now a nightmare. He looked as if he might be physically ill. No one spoke to him. No one looked at him. He was invisible. After the award, Fleet Master Chief Anderson personally escorted Elias to a seat in the front row, a seat that was hastily vacated by a junior officer. He didn't order Elias. He asked him, "Master Chief, would you do us the honor of sitting up front?" Elias, wanting no more fuss, simply nodded and followed, leaning on his cane. P.O.3 Simmons, the young sailor who had been straightening chairs, rushed to get Elias a bottle of water, his hands shaking as he offered it. "Thank you for your service, Master Chief," Simmons stammered, his eyes wide with awe. The pinning ceremony proceeded, but its tone had been irrevocably altered. What was meant to be a celebration of a new generation of leaders had become a powerful, humbling lesson in history and humility. When Marcus Cole's name was finally called, a heavy silence fell over the room. He walked to the stage, his steps heavy, his face pale. As his wife and his sponsor pinned on his anchors, there were no cheers, only a sparse, polite smattering of applause. He was a chief now, but the anchors on his collar felt like they were made of lead. The worst part wasn't the disrespect. The worst part was that he had heard those exact words before, 50 years ago, from a man who was dead 6 hours later. In the days that followed, the story of what happened in the multi-purpose room became a base legend. It was told in mess decks, in maintenance bays, and in chiefs' messes, a cautionary tale about hubris and a reminder of the giants whose legacy they inherited. Marcus Cole was officially a chief petty officer, but his journey had just begun. He was humbled, broken down to his foundations. The first thing he did the next morning was seek out Master Chief Hernandez. He stood before him, his new anchors feeling like a fraud, and apologized. Hernandez listened, then gave him his first real order as a chief. "Go find Master Chief Thorne's service record, read every single page, then come back and we'll talk about what it means to lead." For the next week, Cole spent his evenings in the base library, poring over declassified reports and official citations. He read about the fire on the Forrestal, about the quiet, brutal efficiency of the early SEAL teams, about a leader who consistently put his people before himself, who absorbed blame and deflected praise. He was not just reading a service record, he was witnessing a life of profound service. P.O.3 Simmons was also changed. He started spending his lunch breaks in the base museum, reading the plaques, looking at the old photographs. He began to see the base not just as a place to work, but as a living repository of history, a place where every building, every ship had a story. He started asking the older sailors he worked with about their careers, listening with a new kind of attention and respect. As for Elias Thorne, he wanted nothing more than to fade back into his quiet life. His phone rang more than usual. The CNO's office called. The Secretary of the Navy's office called. He politely declined their invitations to be honored at various events. He had had enough honor to last a lifetime. His real reward came a few days later when his grandson Michael came to visit him at his small house by the bay. The resolution wasn't found in a ceremony or an apology, but in the quiet conversation between a grandfather and his grandson. They sat on Elias's back porch, which overlooked the calm waters of the Chesapeake Bay. The air smelled of low tide and cut grass. Michael was quiet for a long time, watching the gulls circle overhead. "I never knew," Michael said finally, his voice soft. "You never told me any of that." Elias took a slow sip of his iced tea. "Wasn't much to tell. I did my job. A lot of men did more. They're the ones who aren't here to tell their stories. But the Navy Cross. Grandpa, why didn't you ever say anything? The medal isn't the point, Michael, Elias said, turning to look at his grandson. The work is the point. Taking care of your people is the point. Coming home is the point. The rest is just noise and laundry. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the old heavy challenge coin. He pressed it into Michael's hand. The brass was warm from his body. This was given to me by my first Master Chief. He told me it wasn't for proving I was a member of a command. He said it was to remind me of the weight of the responsibility I carried. Every sailor under my charge was my responsibility. Their successes were theirs. Their failures were mine. Michael closed his hand around the coin, feeling its milled edges, its substantial weight. He finally understood. It wasn't about the ribbons on his chest or the rank on his collar. It was about the weight in his hand. Later that week, Marcus Cole drove to Elias Thorne's house. He had found the address through Master Chief Hernandez. He parked on the street and walked up the simple concrete path. He stood on the porch for a full 5 minutes, his hand raised to knock, before he finally found the courage. When Elias opened the door, Cole didn't offer excuses. He simply stood at attention, his eyes filled with a humility that hadn't been there a week ago. Master Chief Thorne, he said, his voice clear and steady. My name is Chief Petty Officer Marcus Cole. I was wrong, and I would be honored if you would teach me how to be a chief. Elias looked at the young man for a long moment, then gave a slow nod and stepped aside, holding the door open. The lesson was about to begin. True honor isn't about the glory you receive, but the service you give. Elias Thorne's life was a testament to that simple, powerful truth. He never sought recognition, but his legacy was written in the lives he saved, the leaders he mentored, and the institution he shaped. The real heroes are often the ones who never tell you they're heroes. Their stories remind us not to judge a person by their appearance or their age, but by the quiet dignity with which they live their lives. The final lingering image is of Elias and Cole sitting on the back porch a month later, not as a legend and a disgrace, but as two chiefs, one old, one new, talking quietly as the sun sets over the water, passing on the wisdom that can't be found in any regulation book. If you were moved by this story of hidden honor and earned respect, subscribe to our channel for more content that celebrates the quiet heroes who walk among us.